Hello. Today we're going to talk about resumes, kind of your whole life on one page. These are extremely important for people graduating from university and just about anybody looking for a job. These are the contents of what we're going to talk about today. Now, what is a resume? A resume is generally a brief outline of your professional, educational, and possibly your personal qualifications for a job, though personal qualifications often don't make it onto a resume. Most resumes are about 1 or 2 pages. Like I said, they're very brief, and they should be something that someone who's hiring can look at that one page very quickly and see your major skill areas. A long resume, mostly used for academic jobs, is referred to as a curriculum vitae or a CV. Now, most of you won't have to worry about this, but this is a much longer form that includes your educational qualifications, your work experience, presentations and workshops, publications, service, volunteer experience, and other honors. Now, first on the resume, you're going to have your contact information. Make sure at minimum to have your name, address, phone number, email, and possibly even a collection of other information such as mobile phone, fax number, and URL for your home website. It should look like this information right here. That'll go at the top of your resume. Next, you write about your education. So, of course, your university name, the location where the university was located, the degree type, in this case it's a Bachelor's of Arts degree or a BA, your major, English education, and the date of graduation. So that would normally be the month and the year that you graduated. And last, you might have your GPA, that's your grade point average. This is often used in resumes when people are just graduating from college. Next one is your work history. Here you're going to write your organization name. So for example here it might be Google company. The location, Seoul, Korea. The position title, trainer. Possibly a department if it's there. This example doesn't have that. The dates that you were employed. So in this case it's January 2010 through April 2012. If you are still employed there, instead of April 2012, you could write present. You also want to have a description of the responsibilities or an overview of your accomplishments that you had at that job. So here there's only one that we wrote about, but if you have more than one, you can use bullet points and describe it. Also look at the way that this is written. Developed and implemented training. Notice here that there's no subject. They go directly to the verb. That's acceptable and that's a proper format for resume writing. Other categories are written very similarly as the ones we just talked about. So you include the name, the date, and only as much description as is necessary, and sometimes that means that none is necessary. You just write what you did and no description is required. So for example, you might write about honors, scholarships, awards, prizes, and so forth. Volunteering, places and jobs that you had where you volunteered. Organizations that you work with. So something that you generally has a direct connection in the field that you want to work in, or if you did something at the organization that is similar to what you want to do in your job. And lastly, skills. These are your specs, right? Your certifications or other undocumented skills like computer, language, and other aspects. Formatting. Resume should be formatted to be pleasing to the eye and easy to read. So it has to look good. People have different ideas of what looks good, but what you can do is you can look out on the web or in other locations and find what other people are doing with their resumes to see how they're making them look nice. Formatting can differ depending on the field. Some in creative fields can be quite unusual. However, in teaching they are rather conservative, which means they're more traditional. The importance overall in all resumes is really on readability, and that is how easy it is to read and how quickly people can get to the information that they want to find. Part of that is the use of fonts. Now, the use of fonts should be consistent throughout the whole resume. That doesn't mean that you have to use the same font for the entire resume. What it does mean is that you have to use the fonts for the specific purpose that you intend. For example, you could use a different font for titles and headings and so forth. But if you do so, you should do that consistently throughout the document. So if you use a different font for a heading, then you should use it for all the headings of the same type. Another aspect is that sans serif fonts like Arial are preferred to serif fonts like Times New Roman, primarily for readability both by human readers and computer scanners. A lot of resumes are actually scanned by computers these days. You can see to the right an example of those. The top one is believed to be easier to read, and certainly is for computers. Just as with fonts, font style should remain consistent throughout the resume. Now, what is a font style? A font style is something like bold or italics or a different size of fonts. Those are generally font styles. Now, you can use different font styles to differentiate elements in your resume. For example, you can use different font styles for organization, for dates, for a job title, and so forth. If you do that, it becomes much easier to differentiate the different let's say organizations that you worked for. However, don't go crazy here. Only use what's necessary for you to make a clean, easy to read resume. If you go overboard, it's just going to look terrible. The use of indentation is another way that you can organize your resume. Indentation is primarily used to set items apart and make them more noticeable. So most resumes use a hanging indent, as you can see in example below. This sets the higher level text further to the left than the lower level text. So you can see that work experience, the heading, is to the far left. Then Sangmyung University, the organization, is indented a little bit, and then indented a little bit more is the type of job, the job title that was had. And so you can see by doing it this way, you can really organize your resume so that it's much easier to find and read your different work experiences in this example. Bullets and numbering. The use of indentation tends to replace the need for bullet points and numbering in resumes to an extent. However, if you're going to have a list and you're going to use that kind of style, use the functionality that's in your word processor. Use the actual bullet function. Don't just use hyphens as a replacement. When you use the bullet function, it does the formatting for you. Bullet points may be a good option for listing items that we discussed in the other section of this presentation. So if you had something like this example, instructional research areas, I just made a nice bulleted list. So now there are some cultural differences between doing resumes in Korea and let's say United States. One of those is in style. So in comparison to the style information provided previously, Korean resumes are somewhat utilitarian. That means kind of basic, plain, black and white, text. They're less focused on style than on context. To a lesser extent, this is a trend in the US as well, since most resumes are computerized, either on web forms or in computer readable resumes. Pictures. In most Western countries, pictures are not common on resumes. In countries like the US, these are actually discouraged. Companies want to appear not to consider the appearance of the applicant, though in reality there are other ways to consider this. But they want to at least pretend that they're not considering that. Also, personal information. Western resumes focus mostly on education and work history, and this is pretty much true for cover letters as well. Korean resumes and cover letters will have a little bit more about personal information than their Western counterparts. So I'll show you an example of my Korean resume, or this is the one that was kind of made for me when I started work at Sangmyung University. And I'll give you a better example here. As you can see here, this is essentially just a form. that was filled in. Now, there certainly is formatting that makes it easier to read. But this is a more consistent form that people are filling out. Now, some jobs, regardless of where you live and where you're from, will provide you some kind of application form, and it might look similar to this. But a Western-style resume is certainly different as well. Now this is my more, I'll call it a Western-style resume. This one's a little bit longer than you might see elsewhere because this is technically a CV. It contains a little bit more information than others. And it looks something like this, where I'll have my university information, certificates and degrees, and then my work experience. Now notice here I use this format rather than bullet points. The reason I do that is simply because I've had a lot of work experience, so I need to put a lot of information into a smaller space. Now notice this, when I worked at 2 different jobs for the same organization, I didn't have to list the organization twice. I listed it once and then put the 2 jobs like this. Now, I'm guessing you probably won't have to do too much with publications and presentations, but you certainly may. That's part of it. You can talk about your clubs and service, honors and awards, and professional organizations that you might belong to. So, why don't you try some of these websites to find some examples that are best for you. Purdue OWL Resume Workshop is a good place to go. About.com Careers, and there are some sample resumes linked here. So use the PowerPoint in the class website to go to those locations. You may notice some differences between the examples that we discussed here and what you see out online, and that's fine. There are many different types of resumes that one can make. The important aspect again is to clearly organize your experience and present yourself as best as you can. Okay, now, what job do you want? So consider the type of job that you want when you leave the university. Now, I'm not talking about your dream job. I'm talking about that first job that you get when you graduate. So, let's do an activity. I want you to go online to either a Korean job website, or you could go to another job website like monster.com that has a lot of international jobs. And then I want you to find the one job that you would like to have. Now, if you're not sure what you want to do, well, just pick one. So then save and print that job advertisement information and bring it to class. Number one, we're going to use it in class to analyze it a little bit. And also, I'm going to want you later to put that in your portfolio, so make sure to save it. Now, when you're looking at that advertisement, I want you to analyze it for things like what qualifications do you need? So what kind of education is required? What kind of work experience? What type of certifications? And so forth. I want you to look at it again and look for what you'll do at that job. So what are your responsibilities, your tasks, should you create, what should you make? Okay, so anything that they expect you to be doing at that job, I want you to write down. Next and last, what do you think your resume should look like? So I want you to make a one-page resume that you're going to submit for that job. Make sure that it looks good and that provides all the information necessary for you to get that job. If you don't have the proper qualifications, use your imagination and fill in the qualifications you will or you should have when you apply for that job. then bring it to our next class. If you have any questions,